From your perspective, what are the actual targets that the industry has come up with?
Back in June this year, the first step in this was the board of directors of the International Air Transport Association adopted three aggressive targets for the industry. The first one is that between now and 2020, we're going to aim to improve the fuel efficiency of the industry by an average of 1.5% per annum. So between now and 2020, that adds up to roughly another 20% improvement in our fuel efficiency. So that's the first target for the short term. Then, probably the most crucial target is the 2020 target. We've committed that from 2020 we're going to cap our emissions. We're going to move to what we call carbon neutral growth, which essentially means that even if our traffic continues to grow, we're going to keep our emissions stable. And that is one of the key challenges we have. The third target is looking much further ahead, and that's out towards 2050, when we've committed to evaluate every way that we can to halve our net emissions by 2050 compared to where they were in 2005.
Now, it's great for an industry to set up targets like that, but of course you can't do it on your own.
No.
What sort of things would you like governments to do to be able to support you in reaching those targets?
Okay. I mean, that's a good question. I think as a global industry, we're probably the only one right now, the only sector that's been able to set targets like that. But you're absolutely right that we can't do that on our own. There are some key elements that governments need to support us by doing. The first one of those is investments in improving technology in air traffic management. Air traffic management improvements are one of the key drivers of emissions reductions in the industry. By having optimum air traffic management systems, it means that we can fly our planes most efficiently, we can reduce the minutes that the planes are flying in the air, we can make the routes between airports much shorter, and that has a knock-on benefit both in terms of reduced fuel burn but also in terms of emissions. So that's number one. Number two is one of the most exciting developments in the last couple of years in the aviation industry has been the potential for using sustainable biofuels for aviation. And we've seen over the last 12 months that technically that's perfectly feasible. The challenge now is how do we ramp up the production, how do we get the investments that are necessary to do that? And that's where governments can play a role as well in providing the right legal and fiscal frameworks and incentives, not in the form of subsidies, but in terms of creating the right investment environment so that we can maximise the potential and the opportunity that those biofuels offer to aviation. And I think that's a very exciting development that's happened. I think the third area, and this is the area where we're saying, look, you know, we are truly a global industry, probably in more ways than many other industries are. We're the global glue that keeps the world economy together, and we bring people together from all over the world. So we are part of the global problem, which is climate change. We're a global industry and we need global solutions. So what we're advocating is what we call a global sectoral approach to aviation, where our emissions are managed at the global level rather than trying to divide them up by countries, because the minute you start to try and do that for aviation, you run into problems in terms of who actually owns the emissions in which place. So they're the three key things we'd like to see governments do.
Now, in the short term, we have the Copenhagen conference coming up in December. Everyone's focusing on that. What would be the ideal, the best outcome for you?
The wish list. The ideal outcome, I think, for us would be that the governments recognise the role that aviation plays in the world economy, and therefore that they do adopt this global sectoral approach. They put that framework in place that will allow us to develop that framework, and also that they recognise the targets that the industry has set as being, you know, genuine targets that they need to encourage us to do, and that, you know, we also would get some commitments to invest in the things that we're asking governments to do. That would be the ideal scenario. The reality is there's a big hill to climb between now and then.
So how optimistic are you that you'll get any of that or some of that?
I would say right now it's 50-50. I mean, I think there's a lot at stake, and of course aviation is a very small piece of the puzzle when you get to the broader geopolitical discussions that are going on. So it really depends on how much progress is made in the overall climate negotiations, and then how aviation is brought into play as part of that. And right now that's still a very open question. So I'm not pessimistic, I'm not optimistic, I'm still sort of 50-50.